Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the culminating event for this year of the Rutgers Africana Studies Project, Insurgent Intersections, Combating Global Anti-Blackness. I'm Dr. Shanti Rosado, an assistant professor in the Department of Africana Studies and one of the co-leaders of the Insurgent Intersections Project, along with my colleagues, Dr. Kim Butler and Dr. Kesey Britton. Insurgent Intersections is a multi-year research and programming project that examines the importance of Blackness and anti-Blackness in our collective struggles for social justice and liberation. This academic year, the third year of the project, we've been examining the theme of lived experiences of anti-Blackness. Tonight, we'll be hosting a poetry reading and discussion with Dr. Pelaez Lopez and Desiree C. Bailey. While we get going, I encourage you to use the chat and share where you're joining us from. Just let us know where you're calling in from. Before we move into the program, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to making this project a reality, because it truly has been a labor of love. So first, we want to thank the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice for their continued support of this project since our first year. We also want to thank the Rutgers Research Council for generously supporting the third and fourth year of programming and research for the project. We would not have been able to develop and grow this project without the help of our department, the Department of Africana Studies at Rutgers, and our chair, Dr. Edward Ramsamy. I'd like to thank our social media coordinator, Paula Estrada, for keeping us online and connected. And a special thanks is in order for our project manager, Jenny Jiang, who has been an essential member of our team and helps us to bring our ideas to life, all while working on her own PhD. Lastly, I'd like to thank you all for being here. Your presence, your questions, your provocations have been a cornerstone of this project. So onto our program for this evening. We named this event Black Poetic Freedom Dreams because we see how our invited guests are engaging with the dream realm, imagination, and futurity in their poetry to address the harms of anti-Blackness and celebrate the vitality of Blackness in its wake. In his book, Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, Robin D.G. Kelley argues that, quote, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us, end quote. I also wanted to share an impromptu quote from Jomaira Figueroa Vasquez, whose event I just went to earlier today. And she says that, quote, reparation of the imagination is sustained by remembering practices, grafting and culling our past, and conjuring radical futures. So our guest tonight will show us how poetry and poetics are critical sites of dreaming freedom. And our hope is that their work and our collective discussion will contribute towards a process of transformation that gets us even just a little bit closer to Black liberation. We see this event not only as a culmination of this year's theme, but as a transition into our fourth and final year of programming, which is going to center on the theme of healing from anti-Blackness. Personally, and I'm sure many of you would agree, I see poetry and the arts more broadly as important vehicles to healing from anti-Blackness while still living in the midst of it. We invite you to join our mailing list, which will be in the chat throughout our conversation, and to stay up to date on next year's programming. I want to pass the mic now to my colleague and co-leader, Dr. Kim Butler, who will introduce tonight's speakers. Hey, Kim.
Hi, thank you so much, Shanti, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight for this special event. And it's really an honor and a joy to introduce our two speakers tonight. Our first poet and writer is Pelaez Lopez, who is an Afro-Indigenous, specifically Zapotec, poet, installation, and an adornment artist from Oaxaca, Mexico. Their work attends to the quotidian realities of undocumented migrants in the United States, Black resistance in the Pacific, and the intimate kinship unit that trans and non-binary people build in the face of violence. They dream of a future where nationalism ends and where indigenous sovereignty is respected, which includes the mess and contradiction of it all. Pelaez Lopez is the author of Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien, published by the Operating System in 2020, which was a finalist for the 2020 International Latino Book Award. Also, To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement, published in 2020, also by Nomadic Press, and is the editor of When Language Broke Open, an anthology of queer and trans Black writers of Latin American descent, published last year by the University of Arizona Press. Our second writer and artist tonight is Desiree C. Bailey, a poet and writer from Trinidad and Tobago and Queens, New York. She is the author of What Noise Against the Cane, published by Yale University Press, which won the Yale Series of Younger Poets Prize and was a finalist for the National Book Award for Poetry, the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, and the T.S. Eliot Four Quartets Prize. What Noise Against the Cane was also longlisted for the International Dylan Thomas Prize and the OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, and was selected as one of the best books of 2021 by the New York Public Library. Desiree is also the author of the short fiction chapbook In Dirt or Salt Water by O'Clock Press. She is currently the inaugural writer in residence at Clemson University and will be an assistant professor at the MFA for Poets and Writers at UMass Amherst starting this fall. So as we begin to move into the actual poetry reading, I'm going to invite everyone to use the chat to drop in any questions, curiosities that you might have for our artists tonight. And I am going to, so while you do that, and I will keep track of it and we'll be able to shoot it to them after the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to invite Alain to share with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you to everybody at Rutgers who worked on this event. I know it takes a while to bring artists in fellowship with one another. So thank you. I am also very excited to be here, particularly because I'll get to be in conversation with Desiree. We've never met. So this feels like a beautiful opening, if I say so myself. So I'll be reading some poems. All of these poems, I think, are unpublished, and I'm excited to share them in this space. They speak to very particular moments in my organizing life, in immigrant rights organizing, queer and trans justice organizing. So we can talk about that in a little bit. The first poem is titled Truths for New Epistemes. Truths for New Epistemes. 1. I am afraid of freedom, not because I romanticize the struggle, but because freedom requires grief, and I am tired of building white candle altars in every corner of my home. Are there enough golden frames already made for all who we will grieve? 2. I will not die for the movement. 3. I felt the most alive when my head rested on a man's thighs as we lay on the sofa watching projections of ball battles. He caressed my chin as I thought of facial hair removal and wondered if he would still be there on the couch with me if I didn't present as I did then. 4. I do not trust everyone's notion of a future. 5, I do not trust anyone who imagines the end of the earth before they are able to vividly imagine the end of capitalism, the end of countries. 6, hopelessness is the most rigorous emotion I have ever felt. Hopelessness taught me that science fiction is the only reality worth conjuring. If the demands we make for liberation are not outside the realm of what the settler state deems possible, those demands are not imaginative nor useful. 7, dreaming is a practice trans-kin mastered at first breath, and a practice many articulate in a court of law as the reason they did what they did to our kin. 8, I am afraid of freedom, but I am not afraid of living. The next poem I'll be reading is titled A Livable Moment is More Than Time. It can be a little theoretical, but like I invite you to just linger. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm writing, but here we go. A livable moment is more than time. It is an aperture to a will-be future. The trope of Blackness as difficulty, violent, is an over-rehearsed performance that refuses the aperture of the now future. A livable moment is the basis of Black life. Blackness is the livable moment. The aperture of this will be future. The Afro-pessimists are not wrong, but Afro-pessimism can risk for closing the aperture. For clarity, escape is not the aperture. Escape is the chase for an unregulated, unsurveilled, livable moment. And if the livable moment is Blackness, escape is a temporal end of racial caste. Escape and escapes happen regularly. Many are happening now, and they go away regularly. Many are going away now. Blackness is not a dark matter, but dark matter does include and offer itself to Blackness. If a livable moment is Blackness, and that Blackness is accessed by an aperture, then ask, will you chase the aperture? How will you re-see, re-witness, perpetually re-understand Black aliveness? I'm gonna read a poem about somebody who I love dearly. When I think of her, I can't help but like smile. Her name is Carolina Lopez. She is an Afro-Mexican trans abolitionist who was undocumented for many years in the United States and frequently talks about surviving solitary confinement. She's the co-founder of Mariposas Sin Fronteras, a nonprofit in Tucson that helps detained folk get out of prison, particularly trans undocumented migrants. And this poem, I wrote it in Spanish, translated it for the purpose of this reading. And it's titled Carolina. Carolina, I want a world where you live gloriously, gorgeously. I want to call you on the phone and hear you laugh like never before. I want you to receive the most excessive proposals of love imaginable. I want you to have all the dogs that you want. I want you to be able to return to Guerrero and render your body to the heat of the sun. No fear, no hesitation, no more longing. I want you to wake up and say, Hoy iré a donde quiero. I want you to live a most lived life. In this world, nothing is speculative. Everything is material. Imagine yourself on the coast of Guerrero with other Black trans girls. No disassociation, no freeze, no fight, no flight, just release. Release. Imagine yourself swimming in the Pacific. When you get out of the ocean, someone offers you a coconut for nothing in exchange and walks away so that you can be with yourself. Imagine yourself. You have a 2-bedroom house, and all your neighbors call your name when you walk by and say, "Eres la que nos hacía falta." Imagine yourself 60 years old, cooking for the girls in the neighborhood. Your home, a church of infinite possibility. Imagine yourself like this, because when we dream, when we fight, we do so for this, for this, for this. I read this poem to her on the phone once a few years ago, and it brought up a lot of silence, followed by a lot of conversation, a lot of plotting, and dreaming of things that like I don't think I knew how to dream about when I was still undocumented in the US. And now I'll read a poem titled The Future. It's a little short, but we love a short piece. At least I do. The future is a travesti from Oaxaca who prays for nourishment, asks permission to hunt iguanas, makes mole of their offering, earrings from dried bones, tea from dried ground skin, and knows to laugh, mourn, mourn. Allegedly, that was going to be the end of my set. But when we were in the waiting room, I decided to read a final poem. So this poem, I guess, has been self-published. I created a large textile, a chiffon textile, and printed the poem onto the textile. So I will be reading this poem, and it's titled Future Story. One day, borders and nation states will be words that we study. Words so fascinating that future generations will try to understand. And thankfully, there will be no grammar for comprehension. Nothing will be forgotten, but borders and nation states will be unimaginable because in the future, the lack of care and commitment to each other that was required to oppress will be something no one has experienced. In the future, we will bring our memory. There will be many creation stories about how we got to where we are. The creation stories will be hard to tell. We will sob from the pain of betrayal, poor care, bad love, state-sanctioned executions, missing and disappeared relatives, endangered languages, extinct species, and the disaster of bearing witness to it all. We will also shake with joy when we describe what it felt like when settlers realized they were the demise of relationality, when settlers begged indigenous peoples, Pueblo peoples, to protect the land, and when indigenous peoples, Pueblo peoples, made settlers sign papers, the same ones they've been so obsessed with, stating that they gave up the concept of citizenship, their loss, and all the land they had accumulated and mistreated. We will release tension when nations end, and the storytellers get to the part where elders and toddlers made offerings so grand to the ocean, volcanoes, mountains, icebergs, and dried waterscapes that words they had never heard started coming to them in dreams. At first, toddlers and elders were terrified, but when they listened closely, they realized that the words were whispers and songs, quiet, quiet tunes with instructions of how to offer and accept care. The care that the whispers and songs were denied, but had once experienced. None of these stories will be easy to witness or tell. Our bodies will only bear to tell and listen to them once every few years, because in those moments, we will meet the past in its barest state. But we will insist on the stories. We will insist on each other. We will insist on a type of care that at this moment might seem impossible, but we get there in the quiet, in the quiet, in the destruction. Thank you.
Whew. Yeah, that's exactly my reaction. Amazing, amazing. Thank you so, so much. There were so many like amazing lines in there, but I'm gonna let Desiree speak first before I go off on tangents. Um, I love the impromptu last one as well. It was beautiful. So thank you again for sharing your powerful and transformative work with us, Alan. I'd like to invite Desiree to share some comments regarding Alan's poetry. You have the floor, Desiree.
Yes, Alan, thank you. What you just shared with us is really such a blessing. Um, I am absolutely in my feelings right now and trying to recover myself. It's one thing to read the poems, right, on the page, but then to hear it activated by your voice, by your body, by you, right? Like that does something completely different and beyond to the poems. And so I'm really, really grateful for that and really grateful to have this space with you here today. I keep thinking of openings when I think of these particular poems. There's this thread, you talk about apertures, you talk about possibilities, about futures, speculations. And you know, I feel like I have my notes organized, but I'm just gonna vibe as they come, right? Um, but I'm thinking about this notion, hello cheeks, of the aperture as an opening for the light. And you also mentioned in that particular poem, I believe it's a moment, a livable moment, is more than time. And this opening for light, opening for witness, opening for seeing. And I find that in these poems, and also within these lines, you give us a kind of technology for what might be to come, right? I don't suppose to know what is ahead of us. There are people who do, right? And we can get into that. But but I deeply appreciate this gesture and feel like it it leads us, or it shows us what you give us across the poems, you know, a sense of what we might need for the future, which of course, if you're giving us what we might need for the future, you're also saying that there has to be a future, right? And there's of course so much talk about these days, especially in the post-eclipse moment, so much about the end of the world, or the end of however we might conceive of where we are at. And so I think it's a really beautiful thing that you give us these statements that think past just the end of the world, right? But as you say in one of the poems, you know, I don't trust anyone who's thinking about the end of the world without thinking about the end of capitalism or the end of these oppressive systems. And so there's a rigor and a tension and a kind of a care that you're challenging us to meet the future with, and so I deeply appreciate that. Of course, um with this thinking about the end of the world, I always think of Sun Ra, right? And that refrain, it's after the end of the world, don't you know that yet? And that question that is directed to the you, that direct question of don't you know that yet? And what so many of us have um, been thinking of, about how there have been many ends of the worlds, right? And even to the supposition of the end of the world in this particular way is a white Western concept, right? Um, and so, yeah, just endless gratitude for that. I'm also thinking of your this notion of the grief of freedom, coming back to your first poem, Truth for New Epistemes. And again, the technologies, the tools that we might need, right, um, for a liberated future. This poem is imbued with that, because we have you tell us in a way that we don't only need what is material, but we need the psychological and also the spiritual as well. And what I get from this is that the feelings, the emotions are important, right? And of course, I think of Audre Lorde, right? When she's like critiquing Descartes. The white fathers, you know, tell me like, I think, therefore I am. But the black mother in us says, I feel, therefore I am. Ay, 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 my girl. You are knocking everything over. Disruptions here, right? Um, and so I appreciate those complexities when thinking about a freedom or freedoms, that there could be grief within that, and that we are meeting a moment beyond romanticism. Um, but, you know, instead of romanticism, thinking about what it might actually require of us. And one of the things that we know, and that this poem tells us it requires of us, is the ability to feel, and is the ability to have compassion, and is the ability um, to think of all of these complicated feelings like hopelessness, which you mentioned, like the grief. I'm not sure where I am on time, because I kind of just decided to kind of riff here. Um, but really so beautiful. Um, One of the last things that I want to say is really thinking about the form of a lot of the poems here, thinking about the declarative statements that you make, and the clarity of speech in these poems, which I think is so important. Um, there's you know, this brings to mind June Jordan and Infitada incantations, right? I said I loved you and I wanted genocide to stop. And in a lot of these poems too, there is that clarity of vision, which I think is so crucial. And it's a clarity that oftentimes in our that hour is very weighted. But in our in our creative writing spaces, we there's a disdain for that clarity. And so I find incredible power in that clarity of voice and vision, and for you to name all of these things that you want, right? And to even for you to be able to say, I want to desire something for yourself, and not only for yourself, but for the people around you, for Carolina, right? I think is the most beautiful resistance, and I thank you for offering that to us today.
Thank you so much, Desiree. Like, just receiving this makes me feel very held, very seen and witnessed. Can I comment now, or do we comment after both of us? Now? Okay.
You can comment now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. No, I think I want to start where you ended on clarity. As a writer, that was one of my insecurities. I used to think that my poetry was too everyday speech, and that because of it, I didn't think that I was poetic enough. And I realized that actually, no, like my poetry, I didn't become a poet just because I like went into classes. I started writing my first book. I never knew that I was writing a book, never thought I was writing a book. Every time I went to either immigration rallies, or when we used to do direct actions, I was always in public transit because I don't know how to drive. So I would always write on public transit. And I was just writing what was happening in the world around me. And because I was writing about like very material things in everyday language, I was like, oh, I don't think this is poetry. This maybe is just journal entries. But when I started meeting other writers, and when I started reading them, I think one of the first writers, I think they're in the Zoom room right now, Jennifer Tamayo, that I really connected with one of their books. I was like, holy shit, poetry is the clarity, it is the quotidian, it is the here, I'm going to give you an image and just like whatever you do with it, it's your responsibility. That's when I kind of like started to see the value in it and started to kind of demystify it, even though it took me a while to see myself as like, oh, I'm a poet, even though I don't have formal training. And I think that being politically active for me has been kind of like the opening to writing. Edwidge Danticat has an essay collection, Create Dangerously, and the first essay is about the responsibility of immigrant writers to write, because there are others in your heritage countries that are either under attack or are surviving war, right? And you mentioning June Jordan also kind of like reminds me of that. As a migrant in a country that, I mean, in Mexico, like journalists are disappeared, artists are disappeared all of the time, and thinking about that in relationship to being here now and like having papers and being like, now that I have papers, I feel even more of an ethical responsibility to write. And for me, like, for a while, I was like, now that I have papers, like, what do I write about? Like, all my poetry has been about being undocumented. I was like, oh, is that the end of my career? Um, and the tension that you said about like regarding the futures, I think I'm grappling with that every single day, because we are living in a settler future. Like we're already living in their future. The way in which we surveil each other on the basis of citizenship, on the basis of gender, on the basis of body size, productivity and value, that is the settler future. And I have to tell people like, no, we can't say we have to imagine like counter futures because settlers are already living in their future. We have to like live in a Black future or in an Indigenous future. We have to live in a trans future. Like we can't wait. Like time is not what we can't prepare for as something else. We have to do it. And I think that I'm at a space where for me, things that are useful is vengeance. I've been like sitting a lot with how upset I am at the world, at things like I had to do an emergency move in the last month because I become significantly more disabled than ever before. And like I had to find like a accessible apartment. Even yesterday when I moved in, I realized that there is one door to a communal space that doesn't have a button. And I use a cane with one hand, and sometimes I lose sensation in my other finger. So I'm like, in my other hand, and I'm like, okay, so there's one door in a main space of a building I just moved into for access needs, and now I can't access if my other hand like loses sensation. And I was like, in that moment, I was like imagining a revenge fantasy against the architects and a revenge fantasy against like literally the leasing office. And for me, I think that that's what it takes. I need these like feelings that are seen as like, oh, you shouldn't have those are bad. Like I need all the bad feeling in order to survive the settler future that I am living in. Like I can no longer be like, oh, I'm gonna like revenge is bad. No, revenge is good. Like in a settler future, it is necessary. And for me, like I think that is an aperture, but also it's always being foreclosed by respectability politics, by you can't say this out loud, by oh, like even though I have papers now, they can be taken away at any moment. And I'm like, I already know how to survive without papers, take them. You know, like I don't like I have so many skills, I don't need them. um, and I think that this is where grief also comes in. Um, I think that I wish that I lived in a world where revenge wasn't necessary, but that is not the world that we inherited. And therefore, I have to grieve that this is a political position forced onto me by both settler colonialism, but by people who look like me, people who I am in community with, who sometimes enjoy the settler future that they are like living in and are complacent. And that is where the grief comes in. Yeah, I think I will stop there. I cannot wait to hear you read and would like to give you the stage.
Ooh, thank you. Thank you. You keep charging up the space, and again, I'm just forever grateful for that, truly. I'm gonna read a few poems from my book, What Noise Against the Cane. Um, and thinking about this theme of both anti-Blackness, but dreaming beyond anti-Blackness. These poems, I think, that I selected today, I think maybe offer a kind of a journey, both of current realities, but also maybe something beyond. And so I'm going to move through these here today. Guesswork. True, there is no homeland. Just my vain feet wandering the shore, marring paradise. Regretful inconvenience, I am smudged in the eye of a tourist camera. Vagrant is what I learned to call the man with snarl of sky for a roof. And how now that word turns inward, taking root within the spleen. I am not lost, or am I? Light a white candle, says a friend, his pupils storming within mine. Neighbor it to a glass of water, flame and water to uncover a path, to greet the ones who walked moons before. Damn near atheists on so many days, but I touch the flame to the wick and my head is light, light, it's lifting. Diasporan daughter raking the soil for a map, a glint of my mama's gold, a bone to call my own. See me, saga gallon kente pom pom shorts, thigh shaped buttered Fulani hoops twisting a secret beside my face. I fix my mouth to say black girl. I twist my tongue to say magic. Yet when the day turns, I scorn this empty-bellied scavenging, the traditions fumbled and swirl to mud. I want to say I am from nowhere and everywhere, but that feels coy, like I'm lifting my skirt for the empire's gaze, even if it is true. On my papers and certificates, there's a country and another country. I can reach beyond, trace the soils through a strand of hair or swab of cheek. But what after? Forever of lineage riven and ruptured. So I search only because I can. And sometimes I exist more and more each day, a brown cotton doll stuffed and stitching the X for her own inadequate eye. And I'm remembering now that, and I don't think I often share this when I read this poem, but I remember writing this on one of my visits back home to Trinidad, and it was a time of just, it felt like I just kept going back for funerals, right? And I was, yeah, I'm remembering this now. This poem just kind of came to me during that time after one of my grandmother's funerals, and just thinking about home and all of the complications of that. And so this other poem, another one that I don't often read, is called First American Years. And it's actually one of the last poems that I wrote for the book. And it came very quickly in a way, but I felt like I needed to do this poem and to revisit my first American years. Me and my brother stare at the skies, wait for snow. Just 50 degrees, but we don't yet know the cold. Before this, a sun scorching the asphalt well before noon. Rain flies flooding the porch, dragging in their warm, wet season. Our father in the flesh, no longer over the phone or in cards or letters stamped with the American flag. The new school wants to know if I can read cat, dog, hat. I think they think big words don't exist on islands. A music video for Biggie, Faith's candlelit croon hemming the shroud of the weeping city. Ma studies to assure America that she can do what she's done for years. Before this, she listened closely to hearts in utero, guided the newcomers through canals. Visits to my aunt in East New York, who laughs like the rhythm section at a cricket match, her neighbor below banging on the ceiling with a broom. Abner Louima survives the police, the horrors of his assault on Luke, 3 major surgeries to mend his body. A hall of fossils is my father's church. Saint Triceratops is Trinity of horns. Saint Stegosaurus of the pilgrimage spine. He teaches us his creeds, the holy biomes, the artifacts almighty. On the news, a painting of the Black Virgin Mary. The mayor's rage sets him ablaze. That was Giuliani. To raids against oil, elephant dung, collage, and glitter. I learned to double dutch without clipsing, collect Spice Girls stickers, read too many of them Babysitters Club books, sing, do you eat bacon? Do you eat bacon? Yes, baby on the school playground, sing scrubs and cruising drop tops, trade my dreadlocks soak up crushes for boy bands. On a field trip to a museum, a white boy I don't know tells me he's glad Martin Luther King Jr. is dead. Amadou, oh Amadou, like all Black innocence, chopped down, stolen, gone too soon. The winter winds eat through me, through my first puffy jacket, the bulky long johns. The cold cracks my lips, though Ma coats them thick with Vaseline. That was my introduction to, to these United States of America, right? Lots of things there. This next poem is called Woman in Dub, and it came out of obviously my obsession with dub music, but also me thinking I love the structure, the sonics of it, the reverb, all of that, and could I emulate those movements in a poem? It's after Lee Scratch Perry's and Max Romeo's song Chase the Devil. Side A. The devil I see is the one I saw and nail out of fears, out of cycles of wound, dread calcifying into prophecy. I put on an iron shirt to face it, chase it, but the cop still pissed drunk with power. I put on an iron shirt, but the men on the street surveil the nipple. Been hounding my punani since before I spilled my first blood. What a menace of a body I hurl blame to the husk. Is the devil real? Or is it of my fantastical making? The answer is not the matter. The fact of paranoia be the true violence, warfare, the very presence of the question. I want to peer inward, to take a good look at the sound system, my heartbeat echoing out of my folkloric thirst, my desperate belief in other realities, a B-side where I'm abolished from emotional labor, aka Black woman's burden, free to surrender to my own madness, to sink down into the dub of it, stripped of my first voice, reverbing outside the pain of a body. Side B, stripped of my first voice, down in the dub, cop hounds my blood into paranoia, a Black reality, cycles spilled, power husk, emotional woman, I iron, real street, folkloric and mad, true. Take a good look at the devil, peer into the dread, men surrender to wound drunk, calcified, but I, fantastic, chasing echoes, nailed to system, free in sound, I a fact, answer of my own making. And I have two more poems that I'll read. This next one is called Orfeo Negro, Black Orpheus, after Marcel Camus' 1959 film, which I have had so many feelings about. So, but again, writing into the complexities, right? Poor Blacks, sweet Blacks, molasses smeared and sticky Blacks, Blacks in favela erect, hoisted high in scorched hills, Blacks in blue, in white, in yellow dresses, Blacks yielding kites to the wind, serene Blacks, toothless Blacks, beige, brown, black, Blacks, Blacks nested in hammocks being tropical, Blacks, Blacks hawking squid and onions, hustling Blacks, cans of oil on their heads, Blacks, Blacks summoning sun from sea, slit throat rooster, Blacks, Blacks haze in lust, in lazy heat, dust Blacks, spice Blacks, watermelon Blacks, water dogs, sailor blacks, blacks whirling gold thread for carnival, starfall blacks, star-crossed blacks, mass blacks, blacks in pretty painted shacks, crucifix blacks, nightfall blacks, shadow blacks, tristeza, the sadness so sweet it rots black. I too from masquerade land, asphalt sputtering, chomping on plastic beads and feathers, costumes re-singing histories of the flesh. My island a speck, a globe of spit slipping past the eye of the world. So I watch Orfeo Negro greedy for a glimpse of myself, a skip trick of light splayed out on the screen. My greed, my open mouth cares not for taste. I am almost ashamed. I want to be looked upon as the world looks upon Eurydice, delicate the way her pistol sways in the breeze. O thirst of commerce, ever sucking despite force of flow, pitching our flesh from port to port. Aren't we charmed and exquisite, dancing as we've always danced, drenched in our cane taint? I'll pause this poem here because it's a bit long and I'm gonna get to the next one. And I don't know, it's activating something this in Mama Cheeks. This is Mama Cheeks, by the way. She's also a part of the reading. This is a duet. I didn't know, but oh, my little South Carolina girl. And the last poem is called Chant for the Waters and Dirt and Blades Light Return. Brooklyn, New York, 2019. A memory of the cemetery flooded with the murmur of the living, the candles' small fires nesting on the graves. My grandfather and we, his thin-limbed offspring, every year in the humid dark, each All Saints' Day, the mosquitoes rising from the grasses to feed. Every year we light, we pray that our dead will not forget the chant below our skins. The scent of melting wax will always call forth the memory of our dead, the unheard footfalls, the bodiless rustling through the dashing leaves. On this Hallows Eve, I am listening to the cars sounding their grievances on Flatbush Avenue while hemming words in my apartment, wishing that I could wake up tomorrow in my first country to visit what remains of my grandfather, to go to him, to the cemetery of his mother, his father, and the wax riding the damp air, its fragrance winding beyond the dark palm print of a bacano tree. Who, what, how do I believe? My worship colonized, my gods painted in a foreign face, my grief song milked in the raised woods, shipped off most wanted commodity. I stuff my ears against the old spirit's call, fearful of the way the past speaks to me. I cling to cold reason, but find empire's grasp especially there. I believe in what makes me free. I believe in the red hot flowers crowning the head of the flamboyant tree. I believe in nutmeg ground down for cassava pone, and the hands, the firm singing hands that push its measurements through the decades. My goddess is the wave unsheathing, my name strung through the conch's contralto. Where will we live, I ask my ocean-torn love? Where will we raise our children if my fibroid womb will allow we of many soils, we who know the curse is the blessing is the curse, we of many and no homes, we who destroy and build, who send our love haunts along the currents, whether quick clapping of hands or hymns of lambs and mercy, or fistful of cowrie thrown across a mat, or psalms to tread the lion and the cobra, or symbols drawn in cornmeal guarded throughout the brutal passage. I fear that I will never be fully at home, that the very first leaving cracked the skull of my belonging, that when I eventually stop moving, I won't understand the land's grieved tongue. I brown the sugar in the heavy bottom pot to fill up every space, to remind myself of language. I belong to the foam that singes the sand where I was thrown, to the waves just weeks into the world, my eyes widening to limestone cliffs, to see almonds ripening upon the shore. My hands are the scarlet ibises, soaring the salt-washed dawn, leaving the sky open like a blade. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I just like got like so much. The ending was amazing, 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 amazing. Oh, so many things that I would, yeah, love to say about that, especially that last poem. Just really like it brings me to the Caribbean. Like it just like I have a flamboyant tree right there. That's that's a picture of. So I just yeah, I want to thank you for bringing me back home. So thank you again for your work. I want to invite Alan to give some words about your poetry. So Alan, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Desiree. Ooh, I think you made a similar comment in the talk back, but reading your work is so different than hearing it. I think that I had seen maybe on Instagram stories like parts of you reading, but to see this set, to hear this said, it's a different sonic experience. Like I think that in the pieces that you read, one of the things that I was thinking about was wandering as either like a method of you being, or wandering as like a poetic practice, but how much of that I read in your work. And there is also in this reading, I was like, oh, there's a lot of crossings happening here. Not only like migratory crossings, but I think that the way that you're able to talk about like your everyday and then reflect. I think it was in First American Years when you're talking about what you don't know, but then the things that are like very clear, like Amir Lumia survived the police, right? Like that is very clear. And the crossing that you're making between Trinidad, Haiti, New York in that piece, I'm just like, fuck, yeah, that's happening. And then you go to the Black Virgin Mary, right? And you're still telling us things that you don't know about the US, but things that you cannot escape, things that like become things that are not introduced to you, but are just factually there, that you have to just learn how to understand, how to quickly move through. And the way that you end that piece, that was First American Years, the winter winds eat through me, through my first puffy jacket, the bulky long johns, the cold cracks my lips, though Ma coats them thick with Vaseline. This is the moment when I don't always believe in poetry. Like I'm always like, whatever, it's poetry. But this is when I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, poetry matters. Because the way that you're describing this migration, this entry point, this intense corporal experience, right? Where the wind is eating through you and what you need is protection, closure, warmth, heat, and then that being offered and prioritizing your lips, right? Like the person doing the offering, the extending is first going to your lips, and then you tell us, coding like what I'm assuming is the rest of you. I think that the attention in that piece of like, yeah, the small parts are what matter the most. And this object, in that final stanza, this object of Vaseline is what is carrying and mending the weight of this new reality in the US. The Vaseline, as you can't do much about what the New York police did to, oh my gosh, I just blanked on Abner Luna's body, right? Like you cannot amend that, you cannot amend the 3 surgeries, but what you can do in this moment that you do with your ma is like the feeling of digits on your skin while you're processing this happening. And then I think that also goes on like your Woman in Dub piece. It's so much music, so there's this poet, Francesca Araujo from the Dominican Republic, who in part of their bio, she says that she terms something the El Caribe Apocalíptico, the apocalyptic, how do you say it in English? Apocalyptic Caribbean. And she kind of theorizes how like all the sounds from the Caribbean are like apocalyptic, and that this piece reminds me of like her theorizations. And also the way that even though like it's in the title, right, Woman in Dub, and then you kind of like bring us to folklore and you're like, my folkloric thirst, and then kind of like go back and question your own body, like your own presence. I'm just like, oh, you're teaching us like the the powerful grammars of dub in that moment when you kind of like you say that your body is a menace, and then you go and tell us that it's a menace because of how your body has been folklorized. And even though like Trinidad is like English speaking, right? I'm always like in my little ass, even though I don't believe in Latinidad, I'm like, y'all know that it was like a Spanish colony as well, right? I think that like this dub, the poetics of dub and the grammar of dub also really makes us think about the different ways of colonialism of the 2 islands. And how like the last form of colonialism, right, with like the British kind of in a sense also made it so that like folks in Trinidad or Tobago kind of had like a different relationship to like Latin American countries, especially Venezuela, which is what, like 20-30 minutes away, right? This like new colonialism then like fragments it. And in this piece, like the different sides in Woman in Dub, I'm like looking at also thinking about that because you keep saying empire. So I'm seeing like the different sides of colonialism in the poetry. And let me look at my notes. Oh, the idea of the tourist camera on you. Um, I've when your book was circling in the world, I wondered how you were experiencing United States reactions to your work, especially like because of this idea of like the tourist camera. And the gaze, and even in the piece where you're talking about somebody making sure you know how to read cat or dog, right? I was kind of wondering like, how has that experience felt like for you? Um, does it feel like a witnessing, or does it feel like something else? Uh, yeah, I think I'll stop it at that. Thank you, Desiree.
So generous. Thank you so much. There's so much there. Wow. Um, Thinking about the wondering and also maybe wandering. maybe I don't know. Yeah, okay. But anyways, yeah. Um, where do I begin in response to this? I want to come back to that poem, First American Years, and also this notion of, again, like we've been talking about the clarity um, in poems and that clear voice not always being accepted in some literary spaces, which then creates a distrust within us of our own poetic voices. And I definitely had that with this poem, right? Because I felt like it came sort of quickly as I was putting the book together, as I was finalizing it. Um, but I felt very much that it needed to be there, that I had so many different concepts in the work, but I just needed to hold space for that little me. I needed to come back to her after I wrote all of this stuff and to be like, okay, I understand something new about what you have experienced, which was incredibly wild, right? And I don't know if I would have had such a moment for reflection without working on the book or without um, being a poet, to be able to think, sure, there are many openings that happen with immigration, but there's also a lot of there's a dislodging and a rupture and disorientation that really stretches across years, really, and some might say even generations. And so I do feel lucky to be able to do this work to kind of, begin that undoing, as we've been talking about. Man, I feel like I don't want to go on too long in this response to you. And I know that we'll have time to talk some more and in the Q&A. But yes, to the apocalyptic sounds, I want to think more about that for sure. The apocalyptic sounds of the Caribbean. And I want to think more about these various colonizers that draw up these borders and separate us. I've been very moved by the work that you do on Latinidad, and sometimes saying that, I don't want to misquote you, but sometimes thinking about the end of that, but again, like really thinking about the complications of that. I found it very useful for myself as a Caribbean person, and thinking about these roots and borders. And yeah, so I want to come back to that at some point. And I'll pause there because I know we're going to keep talking.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both for just the beautiful readings, the beautiful exchange. I know that I did have some questions prepared, but I kind of want to give the floor to the folks who put questions in the chat, and then if we have more time, then we can go into my questions. So with that said, let me pass it to my colleague Kim Butler to field some questions for us. Thank you, Kim.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you. My goodness, I'm sitting here just enjoying all of the things that you all are making me think and feel. So, but let me let our our collective tonight ask some questions. And so Maya Pittman, I'm gonna save yours for the last because it's a great question. And Ariana Brown has a question, and she's directing it to Desiree. But she also had an earlier question for Alan about process. So let me put them together. So for Ariana, she asks, I hear so much play with language, rhythm, and the pleasure of sound, pacing in your work. Can you talk about how you incorporate play, discovery, and excitement into your writing practice? how do you find the rhythms and words that feel right and natural in your poems? Are there writers or artists that you draw inspiration from in the process of making? And while you're thinking about that one, her question for Alan is, I just scrolled right past it. Hold on a second. She said, how does your approach to validating straightforward, clearly written poetry as legitimate and necessary inform how you teach poetry to your students? So we'll take those two questions. So
Thank you, Ariana, for these questions. Yeah, I think as much as I want to kind of push against a notion of poetry for the sake of poetry, right? And I do, but I mean, everyone can do what they want. But for me, I push against that. There is also this element of play with the language, of experimentation with the language, and I actually think it's not unprecedented for me and in my lineage to be doing that. I think about members of my family, think about my grandmother, who both my grandmothers, but there's one that I think about in particular who I actually quote in the book, who I think of as such a wordsmith, and as someone who uh, maybe if she was born in another time, or if that time had the spaces to properly hold her and to meet her with what she needed, I don't know, she would have been an Audre Lorde figure. She would have been someone critiquing systems and structures, a theorist, right? But she did not have those structures to support her, and yeah, and so she made her contributions in other ways, right? And so I think about the ways that she used language, both in humor, but both in this scorching way, this kind of Caliban-esque kind of way to really hurl critiques against an anti-Black, anti-woman world, and so I feel like I'm within that legacy, thinking about the materiality of language, and as someone who have grown up both in Trinidad, in New York, someone who has also lived in Cape Town, South Africa, I'm always paying attention to what language is doing, what sounds are doing, what accents are doing. And so I try to bring that into the work. It has meant that I've I've brought my poems up to the point of almost ruining them by really like pushing them and stretching them, right? And that's always thrilling. but yeah, and as someone who's always interested in sound and sonics, as a former band nerd, I think about what rhythm and what musicality is doing. I'll pause there for now because I have a feeling we'll come back to that, but I'd love to hear from Alan.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Ariana. And Desiree, thank you for that. I wrote down if time could properly hold her. Like that sentiment, right? I think again brings us back to like the theme of today. I just want to hold that while we continue. So I once taught a poetry class at a university, and I remember reading my evaluations, and they were all really great. And then there was this one student that in the evaluations they said, I took this class and I still don't know what a metaphor is. And in my mind, I'm like, really? Like, that's what was important? The class was titled Theorizing Poetic Embodiment, and the basis was how do people who have survived colonialism theorize their corporality through poetics? And maybe colonialism was such a precise experience that there was no reason to teach metaphors. I don't think that the student understood that that's why we weren't thinking about a metaphor, because we were thinking about the everyday realities that colonialism has for Indigenous folk in the United States. And Ariana, I think that when you asked that question, part of what I started doing after that, like when I do like either writing workshops or like teach a lot of poetry, is I try to teach folk that we are super clear on what they're saying. People that we don't ever have to question, like, what did they mean? What do they stand for? What are their values? I think that if sometimes the values of the poet are difficult to find, I unfortunately no longer teach that poet. And I'm like, yeah, you can have a great sonnet, you can have a great haiku or a great contrapuntal, but if I don't know your values, your commitments, I cannot properly teach you. I didn't do that before, and now I feel like I have to. One time my mother doesn't text, she uses voice notes and then the voice notes texts. Her relationship to the written word is not like very great. So that's how she communicates to me. And sometimes I project her text messages to my students and I'm like, this is a poem. These voice memos that that are translated by, the app are poems. She's not writing in a way that makes sense to like the standard Spanish speaker. She's speaking to the phone, so she's already creating work through like a very particular rural vernacular, and that is poetry. Like being that specific about geography, about time, like when you were born, when you left the country, where you are now, like that I think is what oftentimes people want to do in poetry. But I'm like, you don't have to like study this. You can just like talk to someone and like based on how they speak, you'll learn how to write poetry.
Oh, Lord, y'all are saying a word. Thank you so much for that. I want to get to the question that Maya asks, and I want to bridge it because, we here in this project are thinking about anti-Blackness, how it's been experienced, where it comes from, how we have addressed it, and what are we really looking for, which is something that I think you all are both touching on. Alan, you had that line, I hope I have it right. A livable moment is the basis for Black life. Just livable moments. And you two are speaking to, just there's this theme about just being free to move, to be, to all these other things, right? And so I know that Shanti has some questions for you to help us think about what you all are opening up on this conversation, because we have done it in so many voices, right? We've done it through the academics and activists, but to hear it from your voices and, because you all help us feel things. And that's why I want to use that to bridge to Maya's question before giving it back to Shanti for some questions that, tie us back into the project. Maya asked, what has been a moment that has brought you joy, whether large or small, in your work recently? And I wanted to leave hers for last because we are about getting to a space. No, claiming a space of joy. So I'll leave that for you also, whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I'll start. I think it's always joyful to realize that you can write again. That after you've finished up a big process or project rather, and have dealt with all of the things that come with engaging with that work in the world, right? It's really special to have that moment of deep solitude and like the quietness that comes from being your true self on the page again. And also, again, thinking about the sonics and like a poem really, I don't know, making sense, or I don't know, like not to quote Dickinson, but that like that clicking shut type of feeling to write that. What at whatever time of the night or day to have that feeling like, yes, the poems have never left me. That's a joyful feeling for me in the work, right? And to also come to terms with the fact that the writing will always be there in some shape or form, and that for me, I think it's been my maybe most truest and longest companion. And so it just feels, yeah, like I have this long-standing relationship and commitment, and that's really joyful for me.
Um, wow, thank you. Um, a few months ago, I was at Earlham College, which is a tiny Quaker college, and it's also where one of my favorite writers went, to Kalasha, um, a Yankton Dakota writer. And when I was there, I hadn't been able to write for months. I literally, I mean, she passed like almost a decade ago, and I mean, as almost a century ago. And when I was there, I was like, oh my gosh, I was talking to her, I was thinking about her. Like every single moment of my visit at this college, I was thinking about Kalasha. And when I returned, I still couldn't write. And the last couple of things I've written, they're kind of letters to her. And I think that for me, I was just like, holy shit, I'm developing a relationship to this writer it's not just me reading. It's now me talking to this person. At one point, I was like, okay, am I talking to this writer all the time? Because I'm like exhausted, like super, super exhausted, and just like not really there. But I was like, this is probably the most I've been in my body in a long time. Like, I know that the school's infrastructure has changed, but I was in the parking lot and there was like a little patch of grass, and Sikalasha has this vignette about like a squirrel and like how goofy the squirrels are. And then I saw a black squirrel for the first time in my life, and I was like, oh my gosh, was she talking about a black squirrel? Was it in this patch of grass? Like, I think it's the most joy I've gotten in a while, just like this moment, almost 100 years separated from each other.
That's magical. That's magical. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Shanti Rosado, because I know she had another question. But thank you all for answering these questions from the chat.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think, yeah, the commentary about grandmas is interesting, like your grandmother, Desiree, because one of the first things I noticed when I opened the anthology that Aran just edited was that there were so many poems about abuelitas, so many poems about abuelitas, about grandmas. I was just writing about my grandma yesterday, and it's just like, yeah, it's just such a special special thing that connects us to our lineage. And yeah, they're like making history just by existing. So one question that I do want to ask is, how do dreams, the imagination, and futurity help us to better understand Blackness and or combat anti-Blackness? And I think you're both dealing so much with futurity and dreaming and imagination.
I can start. I have this one vivid memory of my childhood being mad at my mom. She was practically a live-in nanny for another family, and I would never really see her. And I used to see her when I was young. We spent time together, like it was, oh wow. It was always assured that Tuesday afternoons was just our time together and Saturday mornings. I remember one Tuesday, it was maybe 7 or 8 p.m. and she was putting on these like knee-high leather boots, and she had this like dark brown lipstick, and then she tells me she's gonna go to the club. Yo, I lost it. I was like, how dare you go to the club when we're supposed to spend time together? And she had had her best friend come over because she was gonna stay with me when my mom was like at the club. So I was gonna be asleep, right? It wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that she's an undocumented, like Black Indigenous woman in fucking Boston, of all places, from Mexico to Boston. Who makes that trip like undocumented, right? And then I was like, holy shit, that was my mom kind of like being like, fuck this country, fuck however you're supposed to like parent, right? Like the weight of the world, she was not going to allow it to enter both our tiny apartment in East Boston, Massachusetts, nor was she gonna allow the weight of the world to enter that club. And I think that this is the first very clear moment in my childhood where I see somebody. I think that she was dreaming, and she was dreaming like in real time. When she was like, yeah, I know we don't see each other that often, but like I got the leather boots and the brown lipstick on. And whatever berrinche, whatever tantrum you're gonna throw, like it is not gonna stop me from going to the nightclub. And it's like, what fucking nightclub is open on Tuesdays, you know? Um, and I know which one it is because it was like a walking distance from where we lived. But I think that like to this day, I'm like, I cannot imagine being a single mother, being undocumented, and still making space for the club. I cannot imagine it. I can barely imagine myself going to the club, like in my current mental state. And I do think that the role of dreaming is so threatening because she was telling the US, I might be illegal, but go look at me, have fun, and go flirt and be seen with this lipstick and these boots. Like illegality didn't matter in that moment. And I think it's this rigorous form. I think that this is like what Black feminism does. Like Black feminism is undervalued because it is so rigorous that it changes time immediately. And that's what it did for my mother. I don't think that when we're imagining futures, we have to think about like the end of the world. I think that when we're imagining futures, one of the first questions we have to ask is, what are poor Black folk already doing? And that is like them like future building and moving from the dream world to the material world. The poem that I read about tea from iguana skin, like I grew up with my grandmother like drying iguana skin and snake skin and drinking it every morning. And it's like, this is a form of future in the present. she knows that it's been the best thing for her health. She doesn't know why, but she's not waiting for a doctor to be like, you need to do X and X and X. She's like, no, we're gonna dry these skins and then we're gonna grind them and we're gonna consume them. That for me, I think, is a form of Black feminism that is always already oriented towards the future, which is towards her aliveness and my aliveness. Like, if her quality of life increases, all of our quality of lives in my family will increase. And by default, it is a Black future in the making.
Yes. Oh my God. Oh, thank you, Alan. And thank you to your mother for giving us this vision of these leather boots, the leather boots for liberation. Okay, and it actually makes me think back to the question about joy and also play as well, and that the beauty in making space for that while dealing with all of these pressures, and not only making space, but it's a must, right? Like, it's a necessity. I think about like when I was still living in Trinidad, very young, and my mom would, like, during the carnival time, I just have these like memories of my mom and my aunt maybe like going off to partake in carnival. And I think of my other grandmother, who was a staunch carnivalist, and would talk about actually making the costume with someone named Miss Holder, Miss Holder's band. She used to talk about that, and just like I don't know, like the tangibility of feeling the materials, making the costume, and showing yourself, parading down the streets, of this kind of visibility that is not that is not I don't know, destructive, right? But a visibility that comes out of the self. Um, and so I think of that somehow. This memory about your mother brings that up for me, about the dancing and about joy and making space for that, but also about dreams, because I think I've been, for like a few years now, I've been dreaming a lot about different parts of carnival, and in particular Juve. And been dreaming about Juve. And so at some point I know I have to write about it, and thinking about um, the persistence of our ancestral rituals, and celebrations and resistances, even in a space, even in spaces of capitalism and commercialization, especially thinking about where carnival tends to be right now in many places, but I'm thinking specifically about Trinidad. And so, yeah, I the dreams are actually a huge part of my poem making, and also my self making, liberation making, because it gives me a way to communicate in a non-linear way. And so whether it's like I'm thinking about the past, I'm thinking about my ancestors, or maybe thinking forward into the future, the dreams give me the ground to be able to do that, and to be able to disrupt colonial time in that way. I'm also thinking of Natalie Diaz. I remember there was a video that she did where she talked about how one of her Mojave elders said that, or there was this worry about the young people losing the language, because the Mojave language is a language of dreams. And so how will the young people know what to do, know what their destinies are, what lies ahead of them, and how to communicate? So I really think of dreams as something, I want to say disrupt, right? But I don't even know if disruption is the right word, because that would assume that, yeah, I feel like it would be the other way around. Other things disrupt the dream, right? Whether it's colonialism, empire, imperialism. And so the dreams are the long lasting kind of, yeah, most connected ways that we have oftentimes, right, to getting back to who we are, and what we might want to do in the world. So yeah, thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so, so much. That was beautiful. I love this idea of like, it's not that dreams are destructive, it's that other things disrupt the dreams, right? I love it, love it. So we are unfortunately out of time, but I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank our speakers for their incredible work and for sharing with each other, for being here, being in community. We invite everyone who's interested to join our mailing list, stay up to date with our events. Keep an eye out, and that includes for our speakers today. Keep an eye out for our call for papers for next year's theme, which is healing from anti-Blackness. And that should be disseminated early fall. And we ask that our speakers stay behind for just a minute so we can thank them personally. But for everyone else, thank you so, so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.